And what is going on, everybody? Hope everybody's enjoying the rest of their day so far. And we are back with another fantasy football live show talking about week 14 fantasy starts and sits, as well as doing our takeaways from week number 13, doing our weekly studs and duds, and then we'll go through the news and headlines that you need to know before you set your lineups in week number 14. And our Thursday night game is going to be a good one between the Dallas Cowboys and the Detroit Lions. Then the Monday night game, cap off week 14, will be the Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Chargers. So for some of you, this is the start of your fantasy football playoffs. I know in the league that we're going to be talking about here at the end of the show, we are going to be starting our fantasy football playoff journey. Since it's going to be 2 weeks of how ESPN does this league, it's going to be week 14 and week 15, and then the championship round will be week 16 and then a week 17. But for most of us, week 14 is the last week of the regular season before we enter the fantasy football playoffs. So this is definitely a crucial time to make sure that you are setting your lineups before the Thursday game, especially, and then what players to start as well. How we're going to do things here, as we always do, we're going to start for studs and duds. Then we'll dive into some news heading into week number 14. Then we'll kind of shift gears heading into the new week of this NFL season. We'll go through our weekly starts and sits, and then we'll close it out to see how our team did in week number 13 to set our roster heading into week number 14. So as always, at the top of the show, I do want to get y'all involved as well. If you have any comments pertaining to now starts and sits questions, you can't really, don't have any trade questions since the trade deadline has already passed in fantasy football. But if you have any fantasy start sit questions, definitely leave that in the comments section down below, and I'll get to it as soon as possible. So let's go ahead and kick off the festivities here with our studs and duds, starting off with our quarterback stud of the week and back-to-back weeks, and that's going to be Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. An impressive showing from the Cowboys on Thanksgiving afternoon in that win against the Kansas City Chiefs. They keep their playoff hopes alive. The Kansas City Chiefs, on the other hand, are definitely going to have to start winning some games here if they do want to make the postseason, which would be the first time, it feels like, in quite some time that we haven't seen the Chiefs make the postseason. So we'll see how KC does for the next couple of weeks. But Prescott, 320 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Didn't really have too much on the ground like he did last week. However, he was able to put a nice showing, 21.6 fantasy points. Patrick Mahomes also had a nice fantasy showing on the opposite end. He did have 29 fantasy points, but to be honest with you, we just expect Patrick Mahomes to put up those numbers every single week. But Dak Prescott has become a top 5 fantasy quarterback overall this season. Definitely a rest of season top 12 quarterback. He definitely has some nice matchups, especially on Thursday night going up against the Detroit Lions. That could honestly be a high scoring shootout the way that those two offenses have been generating. I really like Jared Goff and Dak Prescott. So if you do need a quarterback, if you already have Dak Prescott on your roster, but if you have Jared Goff maybe on your waiver wire, definitely go ahead and pick him up this week because Dak Prescott and Jared Goff both have some nice matchups. But Dak Prescott continues to be phenomenal in fantasy football. Now let's move on to our running back stud of the week in week number 13. That's Devin Singletary of the New York Giants. There were definitely a lot of candidates I really wanted to get to for the running back position. You could have went with Kamani Vidal. He did have a tough matchup, but he was able to put together over 100 yards rushing and 1 touchdown. We will see if we do get Amari Hampton back on Monday night in their matchup against the Eagles. But Devin Singletary really had a nice showing, especially with Tyrone Tracy being carted off the field. Looks like Tracy it didn't really suffer a severe injury, so we might even get Tyrone Tracy back off of the bye week for the Giants. But Singletary really had a nice game, 12 rushing attempts, 68 rushing yards, 1 touchdown. He also added a couple of receptions, 3 receptions, 34 yards to end his day with 21.36 fantasy points. So like I mentioned, Devin Singletary was one of my top waiver wire ads this week. Like I mentioned, I know the Giants are on the bye week, but if we don't get to Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary is going to be clearly the RB1 there for Giants offense. That honestly isn't bad, the way that Jackson Dart has been playing coming off of that concussion protocol. So if you do need a running back, Devin Singletary could definitely be one of those options. We do have some comments getting in here. I can't believe I'm about to ask this. Would you consider starting Jacoby Brissett over Lamar Jackson? I know that is a crazy question, and I'm about to give you a crazy answer. I can't really trust Lamar Jackson at this point. He does have a tough matchup. I know Jacoby Brissett has a tough matchup as well against the Los Angeles Rams, but we have seen it so many times this season where Jacoby Brissett and the Cardinals are getting blown out, and he's still like putting up a ton of yardage. So I know it's a crazy answer, but I'm actually going to start Jacoby Brissett this week against Los Angeles Rams. I know what I just saw from Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers, what they did against that Rams defense. So I got to trust Jacoby Brissett at this point. He's consistently putting up 20-plus points a week, and especially this week, trying to get into the fantasy playoffs, I would start Jacoby Brissett. Yeah, appreciate it. Definitely, if you have any other questions, feel free to. I'll be here for the next 30 minutes or so. Now let's continue on with our wide receiver stud. And A.J. Brown has been like a roller coaster ride. At the start of the season, we were bashing him. Now the past couple of weeks, this is A.J. Brown that we were taking like early, like the late first round, even early second round for your fantasy drafts here before the preseason. But A.J. Brown was terrific once again, 10 receptions, 13 targets in that game, 132 yards and 2 touchdowns and 35.2 fantasy points. Clearly the best game that A.J. Brown has had. So if you were an A.J. Brown owner, hopefully you were patient enough because the past 3 weeks have definitely been what you expected when you drafted Mr. A.J. Brown this week. Now let's move on to the tight end stud. I know that I said to bench Kyle Pitts last week. That was definitely a miss by me. But Kyle Pitts, even in the loss to the New York Jets, I mean, my gosh, that was just a terrible loss for the Atlanta Falcons. Looks like the Falcons are clearly going to be picking not even in the top 10 because that pick is going to be to the Rams. So that is definitely a dumpster fire of the Falcons organization to not even have a first-round pick in the upcoming 2026 NFL Draft. However, Kyle Pitts was really good, 7 receptions, 82 yards. And he clearly, with Drake London being out, London's going to be out more than likely this week. So Kyle Pitts could definitely be an option for you if you do need a tight end. He did have a nice game, 15.2 fantasy points, even in the loss to the Jets. So that is our studs of the week. Now let's go on to our duds of the week. I know that, 13 fantasy points is okay, but Matthew Stafford, the way that he's been playing MVP-type season, this was kind of a dud overall for the Rams. I was really expecting the Rams to clearly win this game against the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, that didn't happen. Bryce Young had one of his best games of his NFL season. Ted McMillan also had a nice game. But 243 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, it was okay. He did have a couple of interceptions. He had 2 interceptions on the day against the Panthers defense. Only 13.62 fantasy points. I do expect a big bounce back for Matthew Stafford. Again, the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals defense has not been great this whole entire season. So I do expect Matthew Stafford to get back on track. So I'm not really panicking at Matthew Stafford. I think, heading into the playoffs, he will have some good matchups moving forward. Now let's move on to our RB stud. And Saquon Barkley has definitely been a disappointment overall for the season, especially when people were taking him in fantasy drafts. I mean, he was going ahead of guys, like I know in some drafts, like he was going ahead of like guys like Jimmy Gibbs even. But another disappointment from Saquon. It feels like we've had more disappointments as of late for Saquon. 13 rushing attempts, 56 yards. It was actually more of a passing game. You saw Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown get more involved. Dallas Goedert didn't have that great of a game either. So Saquon Barkley, we're going to get to another Eagles here because we do have 2 Eagles getting our duds of the week. 5.6 fantasy points. I mean, for a first-round pick, that is just downright pathetic at this point. So Saquon Barkley, we will see if he can bounce back against the Chargers defense. I mean, that's a tough matchup. Once again, he's just getting tough matchup after tough matchup, it feels like. So Saquon Barkley, I think overall this season has been one of the bigger disappointments at the running backs position. I know wide receivers, you could get guys like Brian Thomas and Justin Jefferson as your wide receiver disappointments overall on the season. But let's move on to our wide receiver dud. That's going to be Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. And the inconsistency that you're getting from Lamar Jackson is affecting guys like Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews. Derrick Henry was pretty much the only bright spot for this past Thursday's game against the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Bengals just clearly dominated that game, especially with the return of Joe Burrow. But Zay Flowers, 2 receptions, 6 yards. He did have a fumble in that game. That's why he got down to 0.6 fantasy points. So, I mean, the Ravens overall have been a clear disappointment too. I mean, we've had both Zay Flowers on the duds. I know that we've had Mark Andrews several times this season, but Zay Flowers definitely a disappointment. It was in week number 13. So was to Dallas Goedert, like I mentioned, was not going to be the lone eagle on this list. Only 2 receptions, 27 yards. Goddard has really put up some big numbers this season, but that's just like the tight end, what he is. He's going to have like these big blow-up games, and you'll have like a game like this where he only gets 2 catches on the day, only 4.7 fantasy points. So Dallas Goedert, still a tight end that I'm starting because there's not really many other tight ends out there that you could start. But Dallas Goedert was definitely a disappointment along with his teammate Saquon Barkley. So that is our weekly studs and duds. Now, before we get into our week 14 fantasy starts and sits, let's go ahead and dive into the news and injuries heading into this new NFL season. So we do have just some key pickups. So we're going to just go through the team-wise, and then we'll go through the injury-wise too. So the Buffalo Bills claim cornerback Darius Slay. If you have been in the NFL news, Darius Slay was released from the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it looks like he has found a new home in Buffalo. So it looks like Buffalo, I mean, they need some help because Buffalo's defense has been atrocious for the past couple of weeks. We do have an injury news on the offensive line for the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs left tackle Josh Simmons will be out at least 4 games after a wrist surgery. So that's definitely a big blow to the offensive line of the Chiefs. So just keep that in mind. I mean, if you have Isaiah Pacheco or Kareem Hunt, that could be affecting the production that we see from both of those running backs. Now let's move on to some injury news here as I try and scroll through the ESPN app here. So going on to the Broncos, defensive tackle DJ Jones, who left Sunday night's game with a right ankle injury, did not practice. Looks like outside linebacker Jonah Ellis, who did not play Sunday night due to an illness, was a full participant in practice. Moved on to some more Denver Broncos news. Sean Payton after win. Honestly, this is just surrounding Elijah Moore, so that's not really fantasy relevant. I don't know how many people are starting Elijah Moore this week. Looks like Mark Andrews has agreed to a 3-year deal worth $39.3 million. So that's definitely good news there. Just looking at Thursday night's matchup, Lions ruled out 4 players for Thursday night's game. That's Kirby Joseph, Khalif Raymond, Brock Wright, and Zane Zylstra, but are listing wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown as questionable. I did see another report that he is a game-time decision, so that would definitely be good news, especially if you do have Amon-Ra on your fantasy teams. It was looking like Amon-Ra was going to miss a couple of weeks, but looks like he's a game-time decision. I guess we'll have to see tomorrow night to see if Amon-Ra is a go. If he is a go, I still like, Isaac Tesla and Jameson Williams as plays for this week. And I believe that's most of the injuries. We did have Justin Herbert underwent surgery on Monday in Los Angeles, a fracture to his left hand. Looks like he is going to be day-to-day, and his status against Philadelphia will be determined later in the week. So if you do have Justin Herbert, just keep that injury news in mind. Like I mentioned, the quarterback matchups that I like this week, Trevor Lawrence has a nice matchup. Jordan Love, Jared Goff. So if you don't really want to wait for Justin Herbert, you could go get Jared Goff or Jordan Love or Trevor Lawrence, or even Jacoby Brissett this week, even in a tough matchup. Let's see. We do have some news out of Arizona. The Cardinals are not opening quarterback Kyler Murray's practice window this week. The first week he's eligible to practice. He'll remain on IR for at least 1 more week. So if you do have Jacoby Brissett, that's good news to see Kyler Murray still not returning to the field. But that is pretty much all of our news and injuries heading into week number 14. Like I mentioned, it was definitely good news for Joe Burrow being back for the Cincinnati Bengals. Chase Brown. Chase Brown, look at him. 6 consecutive games where he's gotten over 100 rushing yards. So that's definitely good. He's going to have a nice matchup against the Buffalo Bills. And then guys like T. Higgins, if he can come back, I know he's been hurt for the past couple of weeks. Jamar Chase is only going to level up with Joe Burrow back as QB1. So that is the news and injuries. And now let's dive into our Week 14 fantasy starts and sits. As always, in the starts, we're going to give you 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and 2 tight ends. And then for the sits, we're going to give you 1 of each for each position. So let's go ahead and start off with our starts of the week. And our first one up is going to be Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. Like I mentioned, also like Jared Goff. Jared Goff would definitely be an honorable mention on here. I think that both quarterbacks are going to be fantastic. Could see both of these teams get into the 30s. Could be a high-score matchup in tomorrow night's game. But Dak Prescott has really been on the heater, it feels like, for the past month or so, especially with the elevation of George Pickens to this offense. CeeDee Lamb coming back from injury a couple of weeks ago, and then the guys like Javonte Williams and Jake Ferguson. I mean, this offense has really been firing on all cylinders for, it feels like, the past month. But a good matchup against the Detroit Lions. This Lions defense have allowed 17 or more points to 8 quarterbacks so far in this 2025 campaign. So honestly, this is an easy decision. Just ride with a hot hand. If you have Dak Prescott on your lineups, this is an auto start for this week. Now let's move on to our next quarterback start of the week. That's Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. Now I know that we had Stafford on our dud, but this is just feels like a bounce back for Matthew Stafford, especially in this matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals defense have allowed 2 quarterbacks to score 17-plus points since Week 11. So, I mean, the second half of the season, you've seen opposing quarterbacks have their way against this Cardinals secondary. Looking at his projected totals, projected at 18.8, 261.5 passing yards and 2.2 passing touchdowns. I mean, when you got guys like Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua throwing the football too, I mean, Matthew Stafford's going to have a ton of passing touchdowns. As long as he limits the turnovers. He did have a lot of turnovers in Week 13's matchup against Carolina. But like I mentioned, I do expect this a bounce back in a plus matchup against the Cardinals. Now let's move on to our running back starts of the week. We're going to go to Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. Like I mentioned, it's been 6 consecutive weeks where we've seen Chase Brown hit over 100 yards rushing. And the Buffalo Bills have been the defense that we've been attacking, especially if you're an opposing running back. This defense have given up the 4th most points to running backs, but it feels like over the past couple of weeks, they honestly have given up the most points. It feels like there's been a lot of opposing running backs that have been able to keep track of it. I mean, just go back to week number 1 where Derrick Henry almost put up the kitchen sink pretty much, had a couple of touchdowns, but Chase Brown has really been consistent, it feels like, over the past month, and especially with the addition of Joe Burrow returning to this offense. I mean, Chase Brown is only going to elevate from here in a plus matchup. I think that he's going to clear that 15.7 fantasy mark. It wouldn't shock me if he gets maybe 1 or 2 rushing touchdowns in this game in what could be a high-score matchup between Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. It's going to be a cold one, though, so definitely monitor the weather over the weekend. Now let's move on to our running back, and that's going to be R.J. Harvey of the Denver Broncos. Now, R.J. Harvey has really taken over this backfield, especially with J.K. Dobbins being out for the rest of the season. The matchup is about as good as you're going to get. Las Vegas Raiders, they have allowed 16-plus points to 4 running backs since week number 9. So R.J. Harvey, I mean, he had 2 rushing touchdowns in that overtime win on Sunday night against the Washington Commanders. I mean, R.J. Harvey is one of those running backs where not only is going to give you production in the rushing department, but as well as the receiving department. So I think, it was a tough matchup last time that you saw both of these teams. I mean, the Raiders held the Broncos to 10 points. It was like a 10-9 type of game. Bo Nix struggled in that game. I expect Bo Nix and R.J. Harvey to have a big game against the Las Vegas Raiders. So I am all on R.J. Harvey to be in one of our starts this week. Now let's move on to our wide receivers. That's going to be Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. Now monitor the game time decision clearly of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, even if Amon-Ra plays, is he going to be limited or is he going to be a full go? We just don't know. So for all that, I'm still confident either way in Jameson Williams. You saw him really take over for this offense when Amon-Ra went down with injury early in that game on Thanksgiving against the Packers. And Williams, I mean, he had over 100 yards receiving, got a touchdown in that game. I mean, this is just a matchup that we love for opposing wide receivers. That's the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, this defense have given out the most points to wide receivers. They've pretty much done it all year. So Jameson Williams wouldn't be shocked at all if he clears every over, like gets over the receiving touchdowns at 0.6, receiving yards is at 80.9, projected fantasy points is at 16.7. This could be an explosion game for the Lions. I mean, I like pretty much every offensive player in this game. I think it's going to be one of the higher scoring games of Week 14. So Jameson Williams, go ahead and plug him into your lineup, whether it's your flex spot or your wide receiver too. Now let's move on to our next wide receiver. We're going to stay in the division here. Christian Watson, the Green Bay Packers. Now, Jaden Reed could be back from the injured reserve. That would definitely be an added boost to this offense. But Christian Watson without Jaden Reed, I even think if Jaden Reed plays, Christian Watson has really taken over as a wide receiver one. He had a nice game on Thanksgiving, got a touchdown, over 50 yards receiving, and you could just tell that this is Jordan Love's favorite target over the past couple of weeks. Does get a pretty good matchup against the Chicago Bears. This Bears defense have allowed 14 wide receivers to score 12 points plus points this season so far. So Christian Watson, I actually in one of my leagues picked him up on the waiver wire. So if you're in the same boat like I was, go ahead and pick him up on your waiver wire and plug him into your flex spot, because I definitely think that he's going to produce for you in Week 14. Now let's move on to our tight ends, and that's going to be Brenton Strange of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know that I mentioned briefly on yesterday's video in the waiver wire ads for Brenton Strange. He's pretty much been on our waiver wire ad video for the past 2 weeks. He was coming off injured reserve, missed a chunk of the season, but this week looks like Brian Thomas. I mean, he's going to be back once again. Jacoby Myers still in this offense, so it is a loaded offense. But Brenton Strange has definitely gotten his target share from Trevor Lawrence, and this is a nice matchup going up against the Indianapolis Colts. The first half of the season, I would probably be very weary of this Colts secondary. But the Colts, I mean, they've given up a ton of passing yards the past couple of weeks here. But the Colts, they've allowed the third most points to tight ends this season. So I'm riding with the hot hand. We saw him get like 3 receptions, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Wouldn't be shocked at all if Strange find the end zone once again. So if you need a tight end, I know that a lot of people don't really have Brenton Strange on their rosters. So if you need to pick him up this week and plug him in, Brenton Strange could definitely be a viable candidate for this week. Now let's move on to the next tight end. I know that a lot of people are going to be like, why the hell is Kyle Pitts on the start of the week in a tough matchup against the Seattle Seahawks? But Seahawks have definitely been prone to giving up some points against tight ends. As you see there on the stat, they have allowed 10 tight ends to score 10-plus fantasy points this season. And Kyle Pitts is coming off one of his best performances of the season. Got over 82 receiving yards in that game, good enough for 15 fantasy points. Now, without Drake London, Kyle Pitts is definitely going to soar in this offense. I mean, Darnell Mooney is going to be your wide receiver one. Bijan Robinson is going to be able to get a couple of receptions. But you've also seen Tyler Algier get heavily involved in the goal line too. So, I mean, especially with Drake London being out this week, I think that Kyle Pitts is a good enough option. And, an offense that have been a roller coaster ride, especially with the 2 quarterbacks. So, Michael Penix being out for the rest of the season and Kirk Cousins being the QB1. It is a tough matchup, like I mentioned, going up against the Seattle Seahawks defense. I mean, this Seahawks defense just put up 28 points in fantasy this past week. So they are riding high. I mean, I would definitely trust the Seahawks defense. However, though, tight ends, we needed at least one tight end to start this week. I think that Kyle Pitts is going to have a couple of receptions, maybe have like a 50-plus yard receiving with like 4 or 5 catches, good enough to get you to that 10 points, and that's exactly what you're looking for every single week. Now let's move on to our Week 14 fantasy sits, starting with the quarterback. And that's going to be Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. Now, Williams overall this fantasy season, it's kind of been an up and down season for him, even when the Bears being the number 1 seed in the NFC so far. They are tied with the Rams, actually. But Caleb Williams, tough matchup against the Green Bay Packers. This is a Packers defense that the past 2 weeks have held Jalen Hurts and Jared Goff in check, especially in Lambeau Field. And you know what, Lambeau Field in December, obviously the Bears are going to be used to the cold weather. So I guess you can't really use that excuse. But this Packers defense has really been getting after people. They did, allow Jared Goff to get a couple of touchdowns. So, I mean, Caleb Williams is going to get his, but it's not going to be like that 20-plus point game where we have seen in the past couple of weeks from Caleb Williams. And Caleb Williams coming off of a dud, to be honest with you, only 10 points. They've been really relying on the rush, especially Cobb and Ungai get heavily involved. So try and find another quarterback option if you do have Caleb Williams on your roster. Now let's move on to our next running back. Woody Marks, honestly, has also been a really nice pickup. I know that he was an early pickup, especially with all the injuries to the Texans running backs. But another tough matchup against Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs defense have really been solid against the run. They've allowed the fifth fewest points to running backs. So this is a really tough matchup. Probably going to be a lower scoring game. The Texans defense have really been solid against opposing quarterbacks. So this could be like a 20-17 type game coming down to the wire. But I just don't think that this is going to be an explosion game that you're looking for Woody Marks. Now let's move on to our wide receiver sit of the week. That's going to be Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders. Like I mentioned, pretty much the majority of our sits are matchup dependent, and the Minnesota Vikings have allowed the fewest points to wide receivers. So even if you have Terry McLaurin or Deebo Samuel, I would probably look for another wide receiver. I would definitely rather have guys like Christian Watson or Jameson Williams this week. So Deebo Samuel in a tough matchup against Minnesota could be another lower scoring game. I know the Commanders defense hasn't been great, but the Vikings offense hasn't been great either. So this could be a doozy that we're looking at on Sunday afternoon in Minnesota. Now let's move on to our tight end sit. And Oronde Gadsden was definitely the talk of the town, it feels like, for like midway point of the season. Like Gadsden was putting up like 15 points easily. The past couple of weeks, he's kind of cooled off a little bit. And this matchup is very tough going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, who have allowed the fourth fewest points to tight ends. And if you don't have Justin Herbert, really everyone this offense is going to be knocked down. I think that the Chargers are going to be run the football effectively, both with Kamani Vidal and Amari Hampton. I know that Amari Hampton more than likely will be returning. I wouldn't be surprised if Kamani Vidal is still involved with this offense because he's really been solid, especially with Hampton being sidelined. So that is our starts and sits of the week. Now let's go ahead and move on to how our team did in week number 13. Like I mentioned last week, we were going to be facing off against the best team in the league. And honestly, I expected this outcome to be that, as we did lose to the Birds 132.68 to 106.14. So we do, with the loss, fall to 8-5. The Birds moves to 11-2. I mean, he's going to be the number one seed, not even close in that one. So looking at, just go through the box score here. We'll just go through our starters just to see if we did make every right call. But Bo Nix against the Commanders, 16.44. It was okay. I was expecting more from him. It was a very slow start. And that one in the first half, he was able to get a couple of touchdowns. But R.J. Harvey did get 2 touchdowns in that game. Drake May, his quarterback, had 20.48 fantasy points. And Saquon Barkley just continues to be a disappointment, especially for my lineup, only 5.6 points for us. Chase Brown continues to be solid, like I mentioned, over the past month. It feels like 18.3 for him. Jonathan Taylor and James Cook, two of the better running backs here in fantasy football in 2025. JT had 15.1. Cook had 18.7. That was a tough game for Josh Allen, but James Cook was definitely a bright spot for them in their win. JSN, his lowest point total of the season, 4.3. Amike Ibuka had 8.2. His wide receivers, this is where I was very concerned of. Puka had 13. George Pickens had 16. Tight ends, he had Kyle Pitts score 15, so everything was going right pretty much for his lineup this week. Tyler Warren had 11.2. Troy Franklin, definitely a miss on that one. I expected Franklin to have a big game, but it was actually his teammate having the better game, Courtland Sutton, 17.2. Seahawks, they had scored more than Saquon and Chase Brown combined with 28. Texans had 4. And kickers both scoring double digits. Aubrey had 12 and Chase McLaughlin had 10. So, really looking at it, we probably definitely should have started R.J. Harvey over Troy Franklin. But you add that in, it wouldn't have mattered. The Birds would have still won. Do have some questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and answer that before we get into the rest of this. Thoughts on the squad for playoffs? 12 man, 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 1 flex. Dak Prescott, love Dak Prescott for the rest of the season. JT, Jacobs, Kyron. Damn, that's a pretty solid trio of running backs that you have there. JSN, Lamb, Sutton, Gaskin, Texans defense, Myers, bench. So I guess that. Oh, Myers. I was thinking of Jacoby Myers. That's the kicker for Seattle. Bench. Watson, Godwin, Emmanuel Wilson, Corum, Waller, Reed on IR. I think that your roster is very solid. I just don't really see any changes. I think if you were going to make a change, I would go after a better starting tight end. I think that Gaskin is kind of fallen off. I like Brenton Strange. If you can get guys like Brenton Strange, if Dalton Kincaid even is available, he does have a plus matchup against the worst defense against opposing tight ends. But really, outside of that, I like your quarterback. Your wide receivers are strong. JSN, Lamb, Sutton. So really, the only part that I see about your lineup that could be a weakness is your tight end. So if you get a guy like Brenton Strange, or if Dalton Kincaid is on that, I would drop one of those. Let's see. Would you say that the stud players, like I mentioned, are matchup proof? Yeah, all those players are matchup proof, like JT, Jacobs, Kyron, JSN, all those guys that you have pretty much as your wide receivers and running backs. You're starting no matter what. You're starting the guys that got you there. You're not going and pick up somebody else. I mean, Christian Watson and Courtland Sutton, you could plug and play based on matchups. I know that Sutton has been a roller coaster ride too. So just look at that. But I do like Sutton's matchup this week against the Raiders. Would you drop Gaskin or Waller for Zach Ertz? I actually would drop both of those tight ends for Zach Ertz. I do think that Zach Ertz does have a nice matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. I did have Zach Ertz as one of my favorite waiver wire ads because look what he's producing with Marcus Mariota. I mean, it was a tough matchup on paper against the Denver Broncos. He had 10 catches, over 100 yards. So somebody's got to catch the football in this offense, and Marcus Mariota especially has been looking towards Zach Ertz. So, yes, I would definitely do that. Let's go ahead and go back to the rest of our matchups, and then we'll dive into what waiver wire ads happen. Then we'll also look at the playoff bracket. So it looked like Ben's best team got the win over one of the worst teams in the league. So Ben's best team moves to 9-4. We have a close matchup between 2 4-9 teams. However, this matchup didn't really matter. Both of these teams are not going to make the playoffs. But Tyler's talented team did win this one 105-95. To this one, Doge did win this one 119-86. So looks like every team that we needed to lose actually won. So that's definitely bad news for us. Mushrooms did beat MDR 118-68 to move to 9-4 on the season. So like I mentioned at the top, how this league works, it is start of the playoffs this week in week 14. It's 2 weeks. So the first, I guess the semifinal round would be week 14 and week 15. And then the championship is week 16 and week 17. So our matchup this week that you will see here in a couple of minutes is against the Birds, which we haven't beat. And this is the team that's been our kryptonite pretty much the whole entire season. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and dive into our team just to see if we do need to make some additions or subtractions to our roster just to see what we could do. So let's go ahead and go to our overall roster here. So Bo Nix or Jared Goff. I think I'm leaning towards Jared Goff in this matchup. Bo Nix does have a nice matchup, but man, Bo Nix hasn't put up 20 fantasy points in the past couple of weeks. So I do like Jared Goff's matchup. I mean, that's the best matchup that we are going to get. At the quarterback position, Saquon Barkley, still got to start him. I know that he's been an overall disappointment for the season, but I just can't really justify sitting Saquon in the first round of the playoffs. Chase Brown still going to be a start for us. Same with JSN and Mike Ibuka. Ibuka does honestly have a tough matchup against the Saints, but I am still going to start him this week. Same with Tyler Warren. That's a plus matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I am going to go – I think we are either going to go R.J. Harvey or Marion Hampton here. I think for now I am going to swap my Broncos here with R.J. Harvey be my flex spot. And I think I really don't even have to make any additional changes. I think that Dobbs at this point it could definitely be droppable. Same with Alvin Kamara. We just don't know when he's going to be back. And to be honest with you, I just don't really trust him being a starting quarterback. So those would be two potential cuts on the roster. But let's go ahead and dive into just the overall players. I'm going to go through each players in positions. If just go through the players to see who could fit on your roster, who can also fit on my roster as well. Now let's go on to the quarterbacks. We'll just go through my favorites here. So Jordan Love, if you do need a quarterback this week, is a really nice streaming candidate going up against the Chicago Bears. I know Jacoby Brissett has a tough matchup, but you have seen even in blowouts, he's been able to put up some really big numbers. I mean, I just go back to a couple of weeks ago when they were getting blown out, and he still puts up over 400 passing yards. So Jacoby Brissett has the talent for that. Any other quarterbacks on this list? Not really, but I would definitely – the number one option that I see in my league would be Jordan Love, and Jacoby Brissett does have a tough matchup, but could definitely provide enough for you. Now let's move on to the running back, Zach Charbonnet. I'm just not really fond of at this point. I mean, could he get a touchdown? Sure, against, not really that great of a rush defense in Atlanta. Other guys on this, I mean, Devin Neal, I thought that he was going to have a plus matchup against the Miami Dolphins. He only had 9 points. So if you do need a running back, Devin Neal would still be a nice option there for New Orleans. But really outside of that, Emmanuel Wilson is going back to the RB2 at this point. Looks like Josh Jacobs is back as the RB1. Kareem Hunt has a tough match against the Houston Texans. So not really too many running backs are catching my eye. Chris Rodriguez would be a nice option against the Minnesota Vikings. But really outside of that, I wouldn't waste my time on any of these running backs this week. Moving on to the receivers, definitely some nice receivers that you could definitely pick up this week. I actually think I am going to pick up Christian Watson this week. I think I'm going to swap him actually with the other Green Bay Packers wide receiver, Romeo Doubs. I just think that Christian Watson has just been the better option at this point, so we're going to go ahead and put Christian Watson on our roster. Let's continue on with the wide receivers. I do want to talk about Jacoby Myers. Now, he does have a nice matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, and Myers, ever since he's been added to the roster, I think that his first week that he was on the roster, it was kind of a dud for him. But the past 2 or 3 weeks, he's really been cooking for this Jaguars offense. So Jacoby Myers would definitely be a must-add this week. Jaden Higgins, he does have a tough matchup, but I do like his upside rest of season. Really, and then A.D. Mitchell, too, does have a tough matchup against the Miami Dolphins secondary. However, A.D. Mitchell without, Garrett Wilson being available, A.D. Mitchell has really taken over as the wide receiver 1. Do we have another question coming in? Let's go ahead and answer that. Harvey, Waddle, or ETN at flex? I'm going to go with R.J. Harvey. That's a great matchup that he has against the Las Vegas Raiders. So I'm definitely going to be trusting R.J. Harvey, the RB1 for Denver. Now let's move on to the tight ends. I'll give you a couple of tight ends. Juwan Johnson. He did have a slow start, but looks like he is starting to pick up. So I honestly think if you do need a tight end, Juwan Johnson could definitely be a look at. Same with Colston Loveland and Britton Strange, and even Darren Waller. Darren Waller has a really nice matchup against the New York Jets. So there's definitely a lot of tight ends that you can really pick up and take advantage of, whether that's Juwan Johnson, Loveland, Strange, or Waller for this week and really the rest of the season at this point. Let's go ahead and go to the defenses. We always like to see what defenses we could stream. The Browns defense, definitely the best defense of the week, going up against the Tennessee Titans. Wouldn't touch the Bills against the Cincinnati Bengals. I just think that's going to be, a high-scoring game for them. The Vikings could definitely be an intriguing matchup against the Commanders. Same with the Buccaneers against the Saints. The Saints defense has really been struggling all season. You could honestly start the Commanders. I don't even know if I want to start the Commanders defense. So I guess really the best option that you have this week, I guess either like the Dolphins or the Browns. I mean, there's not too many available defenses here in this league. But I would definitely take a look at the Bucs defense. They were very solid the last time that they faced off against the Saints. They had a pick six. So we'll see if they can get a couple of interceptions to get them to that. But I think that's really the only options and ads that I just think we are going to just add Christian Watson for now. We'll see for the rest of the week if I do want to add any other players. But let's go ahead and look at the playoff bracket. We'll just go through the winners bracket here. So like I mentioned, week 14 and week 15 will be round 1. And then week 16 and week 17 will be round 2. So I'm facing off against the Birds, who's 11-2. We're 0-2 on against him for the season. And we do have Mushrooms in Ben's best team, the 2 and the 3 seed. So we did get knocked down a seed. We were the 3 seed heading into week 13, but with the loss to the Birds, we did fall all the way down to 8-5 as well as a number 4 seed. So it's going to be a tough matchup once again. He has a stacked roster. I mean, he's 11-2, the best team in this league for a reason. So we're definitely going to have to play our best banner football and stuff. We're going to have to start early, especially since we are starting Jared Goff tomorrow night against the Dallas Cowboys. He does have Drake May on the bye, which I definitely think week 14 buys are stupid for this reason, especially for fantasy football turns. But let's just look to see what he has on the bench. I mean, Dak Prescott, so it's just going to be the battle of our Thursday night quarterbacks. But we looked at his roster last week. His running backs loaded with JT and James Cook, receivers as well, Nakua, Pickens, and Sutton. Kyle Pitts is his tight end. This is going to be an uphill battle. So we will see what happens in round number 1. So we will keep track on that, heading into week 15. And if we're lucky enough to beat the best team in the league, we will continue on with championship week in week number 16. With all that, if you have any questions, definitely drop them in the comments. And if you have any questions, even whenever we end the show here, you can drop your questions, and I'll be, looking at the comments, through the rest of the week leading up to our Thursday games, our Sunday games, and then also our Monday night games. So that's going to be it for our weekly fantasy football show. We'll be back next week, probably on next Wednesday, as we mainly been doing here. We'll be back looking at week 14 takeaways, as well as heading into week 15 of the season, where the majority of fantasy players will be heading into the fantasy playoffs. So good luck this week. Hopefully you can clinch a spot into the postseason and start making that championship run. So good luck to everybody this week. Hopefully you're able to get another win this season. So that's going to be it for our Fantasy Weekly show. Stay tuned here. The rest of the week we'll have more fantasy content and college football content as well, especially with it being conference championship week. And then on Sunday, we're going to be having a live reaction show of the unveiling of the 12-team playoff. So definitely stay tuned throughout the rest of the week. We'll have more content, especially with college football. Fantasy football will be earlier in the week. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in, and I'll catch you all next time. So enjoy the rest of your night, and so long for now.